This is Take 5 with Bentley, Nevada. In the studio again today, Tanya Woods, Global Product Compliance Leader for Bentley, Nevada. Tanya, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about hazardous area approvals, talked a little bit about some of the other ones, general safety, general electrical safety. We talked about other approvals like RoHS, dealing with hazardous substances that might be present in the product, lead-based solder, maybe some weird stuff in conformal coatings and so forth. But then there's the cybersecurity certifications, and we spent some time talking with Steve Gaskell and James McDuffie about that. But there's this whole area of safety integrity level and SIL approvals. And I realize it's a little bit challenging right now to try to pick a well-defined date for when these will be available, but I thought maybe what we could talk about is, number one, I know the business is absolutely pursuing SIL certification, so it's not really a question of if, it's more a question of exactly when. But what typically goes into SIL? I think a lot of people might think it's like hazardous areas. You just look at the hardware, you check a few boxes, and you're done. But with SIL, you're looking at a lot more than just the hardware components. Is that right?
Yeah, so SIL has, besides the hardware component, and a lot of it depends on which kind of SIL level, functional safety SIL level that you're going for. For Orbit 60, we're going for SIL 2. So I'll focus on that and not get into some of the other ones. But there, besides the hardware being compliant with the safety numbers that you're going for, there is a firmware aspect to it.
Yes.
So from the hardware standpoint, you have all these failure modes and effects that you have to analyze, and all of the different components on a bill of material is assigned a number. And so you basically kind of sum them all up and make sure that you're good. You can mitigate some of that doing different tricks in your design. And then, of course, your firmware, because you have your firmware that's checking different failure modes and can it alarm on and recognize when you have a failure mode and those types of things. So yeah, it's quite a bit of work.
Well, I think the SIL stuff seemed to have arisen in the industry back in the 90s after there were some pretty spectacular, if that's the right word, failures where people were killed and injured. Piper Alpha platform, I know Bhopal, India, and this whole idea of safety integrity came out of that, safety instrumented systems. Back then, systems weren't really that programmable. And so you didn't have this firmware aspect to look at. But now people want this flexibility, and rightly so. But if you can reconfigure a product to operate differently, you can definitely compromise its ability to function as intended. So I would think the firmware reviews become quite significant in getting these approvals. And probably I would think it means that if you buy a product, you can't just haphazardly load any new firmware that comes out. You're probably locked into particular revisions of firmware.
Yes, I think that is one way to do it. With Bentley, Nevada, historically, once we have released a set of firmware that has functional safety on it, every firmware revision moving forward will also be compliant. And that's more than anything else. I think we try to eliminate the human error factor. We feel there's always going to be people that'll make a mistake, maybe not understand. And so, we just try to make it safe for everybody. If they download a firmware, you're going to be okay.
That's an answer I have to admit I was not expecting.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, no, that's good news for customers, because it's almost like when you start locking down firmware, it means that a SIL customer may not have access to some of the newer enhancements and things. And it sounds like you're trying to make them so they're not mutually exclusive.
That's right. That's the goal.
Once again, that was not the answer I was expecting. So kudos to you and your team and the whole business for the way they're trying to address cybersecurity, SIL, and just basically to maintain pace with global requirements for doing business in hazardous areas and everything else. We're out of time for this episode. That 5 minutes goes by so fast. There's one more topic on this I'd like to cover with you. So we're going to invite you in one last time, Tanya. And you've been listening to Take 5 with Bentley, Nevada, a Baker Hughes business.